Oh, I consider it a great privilege to be here tonight, and I feel like I'm bursting inside to give you this testimony. When I was about 50, I was asked to give a testimony at a TV station called Woman to Woman in Contanning, and after the interview, the interviewer asked me why I said what I said, which I'll tell you later. And then shortly after that, I gave my testimony at the large church in Sharpsville Presbyterian Church, where I was a music minister, and the pastor came to me later on and said that I said too much. And so I was really sort of ashamed, maybe, of my testimony, so I decided never to give it again. About a year and a half ago, my girlfriend from Mansfield called me and said, "Dolly, would you bring a workshop up here for the women?" I knew the women well in Mansfield, a workshop on the Word. "But I really feel in my heart you need to give your testimony." Well, if you knew this friend of mine, she's as pure can be. And if she says in her heart she feels something, you know that's from God. So it opened the door. I gave my testimony. I felt safe, and I felt very loved by the women. And it opened up the doors to start again my testimony in several places. So it gives me an honor to bring it here tonight. My mom was named Emma Pasigna. She was 15 when she met my dad. She was very beautiful. She came from a family of 10 children, and she was the oldest girl. So she had a lot of responsibility. My grandmother, her mother, my grandmother had several breakdowns, so she had to take care of all the little children. She was very beautiful. Even at 15, she had black hair, green eyes, and very shapely. I don't know when my dad met her. My dad was a very handsome man. He was tall, thin, black wavy hair, and he was 21, and he came from a family of 2, a stepsister named Dolores and himself. I don't know how long they courted, but it was okay because they were both Italian, and the Italian family, you know, approved of their dating. It wasn't too long after that he asked my mother to marry him. And my mother was very happy to jump at the chance of getting married and getting out of the house. And so they got married, and they lived with my paternal grandmother, which later on we called Nonina. She was short. She walked with a limp. One leg was shorter than the other, and she made her living by the making and the selling of wine. When my mother turned 16, she got pregnant, and she had my brother. It was right after the birth of my brother that my dad started changing. He started drinking. He had a fabulous job at the Westinghouse, and he started not coming home, spending the entire pay, and not coming home. So my mother made a vow that she would not have any more children with my dad. She told me this years later. And that if she got pregnant, she would have an abortion. And she was very serious about that. Well, she took on duties for my grandmother, that they lived with my nonina. My grandmother had an old brick house that was 3 stories high. The top floor had 2 bedrooms where she had roomers. The second floor was 3 bedrooms. Downstairs was a large kitchen, dining room, a large living room, and a pantry. So Mom took care of keeping it clean and keeping it neat. And she was very, very tired all the time. And my nonina said to her, you know, Emma, you need to go get a checkup. And why don't you just go to Dr. Patterson? He lived just a few blocks away from us. And so Mom went down and he gave her a thorough examination in and out. And he said to her, he said, Mrs. Maestri, I don't see anything wrong with you other than you're about 5 months pregnant. And she said, how can that be? I haven't gained any weight and I don't feel any life. Well, 4 months later, I was born. And from the moment that I was born, I became my mother's companion. And we went everywhere together, everywhere. Now, my grandmother made this wine, this living of wine, and she really was very famous. She covered a lot of territory in selling the wine, and from all over they came. Even, I think his name, well, Monsignor, not Monsignor Murphy, Monty, from Our Lady of Fatima, would come there and sit with my grandmother and drink wine. There was a Father Noce that came there and patronized her wine. And he was a Catholic priest that turned Protestant, and he became the pastor of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. When he came there, there was never any talk about religion in our house. Maybe the few times that Father Noce came, he would encourage my grandmother and tell her, why doesn't Emma bring the kids to church? And so my mom gave it a little try and took my brother and I. I don't recall ever seeing my father, and maybe the few times with my mother. I want you to keep in mind, whatever I say about my family, I loved my family very much, and I thought everybody lived like I did. I thought the whole world was like what we were. There was company in our house all the time. There was activity all the time. My grandmother was a tremendous cook, so she cooked and charged for those that came to drink her wine if they wanted to eat. It was like a bed and breakfast with liquor. That's what I always thought about it. And a lot, like I said, a lot of activity. Our weekend activity would be on the corner of Spearman Avenue. There was a German home, and every weekend we went to the German home, and we ate supper there, and there was a band, and we would dance. And I can remember being 5 years old and dancing around the tables, and people would throw nickels at me. So again, the activity in my home was, it seemed like every couple that came was an aunt and an uncle. We always called them Aunt Kate or Uncle Angelo, whatever it was. Well, there really was an Uncle Angelo, and when he came there, he would clear out the dining room and we would dance. Everybody would dance during the week. And they put the phonograph on and then dance. If they weren't dancing, we were playing cards. And we as children, my brother, myself, and my cousin that lived there, never had to go to bed early. We were allowed to stay up with the adults. We sat in and played cards. So by the time I was 10 years old, I knew how to play poker, if not as good, if not better, than an adult. And I still do know how to play. Again, there was not any talk about church, but somehow my mom did take us to this little Episcopal church, and I heard stories about how Jesus loved the little children. It was a very social church. They had suppers, spaghetti suppers, and parties, Halloween parties, Christmas parties. I can't say that I ever really remember a sermon, or I never heard the word, or remembered that I heard the word in this little church. But some of the company that I'm reverting back, that my grandmother had, was a professor from Westminster College, and he was the head of the music department, the piano music department in Westminster College. And he came, had suppers with us every week, and he said to my grandmother, can I teach Raymond and Dolores, my real name was Dolores, piano. And so I started taking piano lessons. We both did, my brother and I. My brother didn't stick with it. He stayed with it for about 5 years, but I was really made to take piano. I'm saying all that because in this little church, they were desperate for music, for somebody to play music. I really was not good. It may sound glamorous what I'm going to say, but it was not glamorous. I was not committed. No one in my family, my brother, my mother. It came down to where I could see my mother, my brother, myself going to this little church, and then it was just my brother and myself, and playing on Sunday. But there were Sundays that I did not go and play, and my bedroom was like on an alley. We lived in a little bungalow behind my grandmother, and there was a great big window. And on those Sundays that I didn't go to church, I remember looking up to the sky and shaking that this God was going to punish me. This God I didn't know was a punishing God, and that always stuck in my mind. I had a little choir of 5 people that hovered over me while I played and sang and led them through songs. Like I said, it sounded glamorous, but it wasn't. It was, I always felt I wasn't really that good. I would like to describe what my brother was like. Being the firstborn, being a boy, was an honor in the Italian family. What topped it all, he was very good looking from the time he was a little boy. He had perfect teeth. He had a beautiful countenance on him. He was on the chubby side, but he had a nice build. And more than anything, he was brilliant. My brother had a photographic mind. He never brought a book home. He got A's and A+s all the time, and when he graduated, he won many awards. He won the math award, and he won an award to a naval prep school, which he did not take because he wanted to work at the Westinghouse and earn money. I, on the other hand, was completely opposite of my brother. I was very plain. I had crooked teeth, and I was tall. In 6th grade, I was probably about 5'6" already, and I was very, very skinny. Everybody worried about how skinny I was and how thin I was. My grandmother, which was on my mom's side, and I would like to tell you the difference in the 2 grandmas. The grandma that I lived with spoke perfect English. You would never know that she came from Italy when she was 18. On the other hand, the grandmother, which was my mom's mom, and we all lived on the same block, maybe four blocks away from each other, spoke broken English. And both grandmothers were concerned about me gaining weight, but my grandmother that I lived with made me eggnogs and cooked a lot of meat to try to fatten me up. And the other grandmother would try to stuff pasta in my mouth to try to fat me up. And I hated going down there because I knew she would try forcing food on me. On the way home, on the block that I lived on, there were two movie houses, a Colonial and a Capitol, which as a teenager I ended up working at them as a ticket seller. And my mother took me to the show every day. Every day we went down to see her mom and father, and on the way back we went to a show. And I knew all the actors and actresses, and I have to say I got good grades, but I didn't have a photographic mind. I had to carry every single book home that was in my desk. We walked a mile to school and a mile back from school, and I carried all my books, and my brother didn't have to worry about a book. But I did get good grades, but I had to work very, very hard at getting the grades. When I was about 14, my family started falling apart. My dad, I think around between 14 and 15, left and started living with another woman. At that time, I never, ever saw my mother smile after that. And she could not communicate with me. She was so sad and so unhappy that it was hard for her. I couldn't understand. I wanted her to communicate what was happening to her. But she was incapable at that time to do that. I had to teach myself hygiene. I had to teach myself how to buy clothes. I had to teach myself how to start a furnace and how to cook a simple hamburger. And my mom, at that time, my brother worked at the Westinghouse, my father was gone, and I was very, very lonely. I would come home from school and eat with my coat on because there was nobody there, and by the time I got the furnace started, it was still cold. Mom worked many jobs to try to make a house a home, and she was very capable of making a house a home. She brought food home a lot for us, and so we did eat. We were always, how should I say, I never went hungry. I went emotionally hungry. My brother, I said, worked at the Westinghouse and made tremendous money. He saved about $500 up. I never saw my dad and brother fight, and I never saw my dad raise his hand to my brother. But one night there was a vicious, vicious argument where my father raised his hand to my brother. He wanted my brother's money to buy a car, and my brother wanted that money for a motorcycle. That night, my brother ran out of the house, and we didn't see him for 3 days. We didn't call the police. We waited to see if we would hear from him. On the 3rd day, he called us, and he said, "Mom, I joined the Naval Prep School." From the Naval Prep School, because he was so brilliant, he got a, I don't know what it is that Senator Kearns had to give some sort of a communication about allowing him into the Naval Academy. My brother, maybe out of 100, passed, 5 were picked, and he was one of the 5. And so he became a naval cadet. And I saw him very, very, very little. I was very sad and empty not having my brother. He was like a lifeline to me. Well, I had a lot of friends, and most of my friends were Catholic. And when I would leave my little Episcopal church, I would meet all my friends on Roland Boulevard coming down. I would meet them on the corner, and I would go to church with them, which was Our Lady of Fatima at the time. I was amazed. I was so amazed looking around at the hundreds of people in that church. I didn't understand anything that went on, but if they stood up, I stood up. If they knelt, I knelt. So by the time I met my husband, and my husband asked me if I wouldn't, when he asked me to marry him, if I wouldn't turn Catholic, I had no problem, because I had been indoctrinated into the Catholic Church. He asked me, there was a time when we got engaged at Christmas time. I was 17 when I met him, and I turned 18 in November. He was in the service by this time. He gave me a ring at Christmas time, and then for 2 or 2.5 years, something like that, he was in the service, and it was, again, a very sad, unhappy time of my life. I tried going out with maybe some of my girlfriends, but my grandmother was a strict, old-fashioned grandma that I lived with, and she would just attack me if I got home at 9 o'clock with my girlfriends and say, "You don't love him," or "You would stay home." So I quit. I quit going out. I quit even having companionship with all my girlfriends. I sat at home and waited for him. I worked at the Westinghouse, and again, loneliness and emptiness began to eat away at me. At this point, my husband and I broke up for a short time. Maybe he had changed when he came home, I had changed. And we needed that little bit of time away from each other to find ourselves. And I did, and he did. I had saved up money, and I went and blew it all on clothes because he felt I didn't dress like I used to dress. So I went out and I bought all kind of clothes. I dated, which I was miserable even when I was dating, because down deep, I missed him. Somewhere along the line, we solved our problems and we got married. And I have to say, I took the Catholic instructions that he had asked me while he was in the service, and I was faithful in going. It was the priests that taught me the instructions, and they taught me all the laws and the rules of the Catholic Church. They taught me how to say the rosaries. They taught me about novenas and about Stations of the Cross and communion and confirmation and confession. And I drank it in. I drank it in because they hammered in my head this was the truth. So that when anyone ever handed me a tract and tried to tell me about Jesus, I would just tell them to get away from me. I don't want to hear about your Jesus, and I would rip that tract up in 1,000 million pieces because I knew I had the truth. Well, we got married, and in that short amount of time, I started having baby after baby after baby. In maybe, I'll say 10 years, there were 6 children and 3 miscarriages. And being in the Catholic Church, there was no absolution. You were told you are to have children, have babies. My mother started coming up, and we really grew close. Somehow she saw her and my dad divorced, and she seemed to be free of that little bit of sadness that was in her life. And she really enjoyed coming up. She really taught me how to be a mother. We were like two kids growing up with these babies, and my mom was just so wonderful. She came up one day a week, she helped me iron, she cooked meals, she played with the kids, she showed me how to handle babies, how to feed them, and it was wonderful. It was a wonderful time with my mom at that time. But something was happening to me, even physically, and my mom was very aware of it. I really hated life. I didn't let anybody know. I had a wonderful husband and healthy children, but I was very, very, very unhappy. I was empty. There was something gnawing inside of me, and I really didn't want to live to be the age of my grandmother when she died. And Mom knew something was wrong, so she told my husband to take me to a doctor. He took me to see Dr. Loser. I was very quiet about what was going on mentally in my head. And there was a time when I really wanted to die and had the pills in my hand. No one knew. I cried many nights myself in my own loneliness. And I had nothing to be lonely about. I had these wonderful children and a wonderful husband, but I was lonely. And these pills, and then I loathed myself because I was a coward. I was too afraid to die and too afraid to take the pills. So he took me to Dr. Loser. And I didn't say anything to Dr. Loser right away, but then I said something before I went out, that I had suicidal tendencies. Dr. Loser became very alarmed, and he wrote out a prescription for an antidepressant. And he told my husband, why don't I try to get a little part-time job, that a part-time job would help me. And I had some experience before I worked at the Westinghouse of selling shoes. So because of that experience, I was hired at Ryer's Shoe Store. It was so wonderful getting out 3 days a week. I was a part-timer, that when he came home from work, I got dressed and I went to work. It was like a family down there. They were wonderful, wonderful people to work for. Mr. Jubileer loved us even as a family, and he allowed me to have a wonderful discount for all these kids for school shoes. And I felt myself getting better, and on the antidepressant and with this little job. But wouldn't you know it, I got pregnant again, and I had to quit this little wonderful job that I loved. I had my 6th baby, and with this 6th baby, I should say that the emptiness never left me. That emptiness just was still deep and getting deeper and getting deeper. I thought by going to church more, I started going daily to Mass, and I thought that would help, and communion. I went to confession every week, hoping that it would fill in the void, and did everything I could possibly think of Catholic-wise to fill in that emptiness, but nothing seemed to fill that emptiness. Well, my family did everything we were like a well-trained unit. We took our children to Mass. They were well-behaved. My husband was still a sergeant. He was a sergeant in the service, and he was a sergeant at home. And he trained the kids and he trained me too. He was a sergeant over me. I told you that life held nothing, you know, for me. Loving this job, my baby was 13 months old and something started happening again. All of this is pertinent to the testimony because it was like a step-by-step coming closer. And emptiness was getting worse, and yet something was planned. But when my sixth child was born, she was 13 months old, and something happened to my lung. My dad had died of lung cancer before this happened to me. And one day I could not get out of bed. The pain shot through my body, and I don't know if it was, I think I took myself to the doctor and then myself to the hospital. My lung had collapsed. So they tried for about 2 weeks to put up build my lung up. They put me on a machine, and they would make a hole, put a tube down, and let it heal itself. And I felt like it was healing. They would take the tube up, take me off the machine, and down would go my lung. So Dr. Sass said, we have to go in and we have to operate. Well, I can't say that I wasn't scared. I was. And they removed the large lobe of my left lung. There was a hole. I never smoked a day in my life, and yet there was a hole, something I had when I was young that probably didn't have the medical attention, and ate away at my lung. In fact, the doctor could not understand how I had the last couple of children because it was eating away at my lung, and I felt tired almost all the time. When I was in the hospital about a month. My mother took the baby. The younger children were farmed out to a girlfriend, and my husband took care of the household and the other children. My aunt took care of me for a while till I was strong enough to come home. I came home maybe a weekend and I would go back to my aunt's. The baby was, I don't know, maybe about 4 months old. She didn't know me. When I would get her a little bit on a weekend to see if I was strong enough to take care of her. An operation like that in that day was serious. Today it's probably nothing. Well, after I got stronger, depression moved in again on top of me, and the emptiness just got deeper and deeper. And my girlfriend said to me, Dolly, why don't you start playing the piano again? So Steve went out and bought me a piano, and I started taking lessons every other week with Sister Mary Daniel, and my skills started coming back. And at the end of a year, I asked her if she would prepare me maybe for college. But it was still a long way off, and I knew that I had to go to work. I had to go back out to work. I didn't go back to Rogers Shoe Store. I went to First National Bank in Hermitage, and it was a different world. They were not like the people at Rogers Shoe Store that was like a loving family. They were people of the world that went out drinking and didn't go home after work. I was quiet, I watched this. There was even adultery carried on at the bank because there was a third floor empty, and I would see couples go up there and I knew what was going on. But I did my job, and I just was very quiet and paid no attention to what was going on there. Again, I have to say that it was getting so bad, the emptiness inside of me. I felt like a desperate woman. Now, how could a woman with a wonderful husband, 6 healthy children, a home, be unhappy as I was? And I could not put my finger on it. I could not, nothing seemed to fill that unhappiness. I got dressed every day. He came home from work, I got dressed, and I would go to work, and I was a teller. One day when I got dressed, I'm not proud of what I said this day, but I want you to know this is where the testimony really begins. I looked in the mirror, I got dressed, I was getting ready to go to the bank. I was a desperate woman. I was desperate. I couldn't stand the emptiness anymore in me. And I looked in the mirror and I said, God, I'm tired of praying to you. Satan, if you're real and you give me what I want, you can have my soul. I cannot tell you, from that moment, my life took a 90-degree turnaround. I never drank before, and I started going out that very night with everybody. I didn't come home till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I found myself with a drink in my hand all the time. I didn't smoke. I took household money to buy clothes, provocative clothes, short skirts. I let my hair grow long and wild, and I didn't know who I was. I had no idea. This was a different person, a different personality that I wasn't used to, and I couldn't bring it all together. I kept going out with everybody every night, 1, 2 o'clock, whenever I worked part-time. Something else was happening to me. I was becoming very tired, and I would have to push myself out of bed in the morning, go downstairs, make all the lunches, get my husband off to work, all the children off to school, and lay back down on the studio couch. It was right there by the stairs. I had no energy. It was like just to pick up my arm, it was work. I would push myself up off the couch and go down and throw a load of clothes in and go lay back down. I would get up again and make supper and lay back down. I didn't know what was happening to me. I know that I was very sick physically. One morning, I couldn't get out of bed at all. And my husband got up, got all the children off to school, and I lay in bed. I pushed myself over the side of the bed, and I crawled on my hands and knees to the top of the steps. And I slid down the steps on my belly and got myself on the studio couch. And I felt like I was drowning. Help me. I was crying out inside, help me. The phone rang. I don't know how I got to the phone. And it was a girlfriend that I hadn't seen in 3 months because I had lost contact with all decent friends. I only had the friends from the bank from then on. And her name was Dolores. And I broke down and I cried and I told her what was happening to me and how I was living. And she started giving me the word. I didn't understand what she was saying to me, but it's the first time I listened. She talked and I listened. If she said Jesus, I listened. She called me every single day for 2 months. I could feel whatever she was feeding me. I could feel strength coming back into my body. And one night she said to me, Dolly, it was 2 months after that first phone call. And she said, Dolly, tonight's the night. She told me how to bind Satan and loose the Holy Spirit, bind and loose, and whatever else. I didn't understand a word she meant, but I did everything she told me to do. She said, Dolly, tonight you're going to have strength to say goodbye to whoever should not be in your life. She prayed with me. I got dressed. I went to the bank. It was the biggest battle of my life. There was a voice that said to me, you don't want to do this. Life is going to be boring again. And there was a small, still voice that said, Dolly, this is it. This is it. I don't know how I balanced that night, but I balanced. I went out, opened the doors, and everybody said, I'll see you, Dolly. And they told me where they were going to be. And I was walking to the car. I looked up, and I said, Jesus, I don't know you. My life is a mess. Would you forgive me, come into my heart, come into my life, take charge, because I can't do anything. I didn't hear any bells. There was no lightning or something fabulous that happened to me. But I have to tell you that I had strength to go where I was supposed to go, and I said goodbye to every single person that was not to be in my life. I got back in the car and I drove myself to Penn State University, the branch, parked my car, and I began to cry. A cry that came from the pit of my belly, up, loud. It's no wonder they didn't hear me all over the town. I cried and I cried and I cried. Those tears washed away the darkness of my childhood. Those tears washed away the rejection of my teenage years. And the tears washed away the sins of my adult life. It didn't stop until it stopped. And when it stopped, there was a peace that I never knew in my entire life. I went home that night, and I'm sure nobody knew what happened to me, because I had a joy and a peace from that day on. I found myself shortly after that, it was within 2 months after finding Jesus, that I guess they say that all things work together for good. When I lost that part of that lung, BVR, which is Bureau of Rehabilitation, paid for my college. And there was enough money to buy a coat and boots, which I didn't have. And I found myself in college. Something else happened to me. I was hungry for the Word. I didn't even know what the Word was. I had a big Bible as a Catholic on my TV, and there were days I would go there and scroll through it, and I'd think, oh my God, this is so boring. You know, how does anybody get? But after that born again experience, I was hungry for this Word, and my girlfriend bought me a Bible, and I could not put it down. I read and I read and I read. I carried it everywhere. When I found myself in school, I carried it. in every class. And I was like the Pied Piper, not because I was such a great Christian woman. I was so full of the Word, and I needed Him so badly, even in school, that I was filled with Him. And they would come and study at my house, put down their study books and say, "Dolly, tell us about Jesus." I was telling everybody about Jesus, and I had no qualms about who He was and what He was. There's so much more that I would love to say. There's two things that I would like to do. In closing, one, I would love, I'm sure in your mind, you must wonder, where was my husband in all of this? I would love to honor my husband. This wonderful, wonderful man never screamed at me, never threatened me, never hurt me, never questioned me, never, he just simply did his job as a husband and a father and kept the house together when I couldn't keep a house together. This man, this is a great man of integrity, and I have one more thing to say about him besides thanking you for being my husband. Never in my entire life have I ever seen a man love a woman the way this man has loved me unconditionally. Unconditionally. Never, ever, ever questioned me. Through anything and everything, he remained loving me, always loving me, always. He's the one that needs to be honored tonight, not me. He made me what I am. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be up here tonight. Secondly, I want you to turn your Bibles to Psalm 40. This is like a summary of my testimony. Never go without your Bible. Don't leave your Bible in a car. Carry your Bible with you, even if you don't open it. Make sure it's with you. The first verse, I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined unto me, and He heard my cry. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of a miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. He put a new song in my mouth, and even praise to our God. Many shall see it, and fear, and shall trust in the Lord. Blessed is that man that maketh the Lord his trust, and respects not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done. And thy thoughts which are to usward, they cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare them and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. Sacrifice and offerings thou did not desire, mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offerings and sin offering hast thou not required. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within my heart. I have preached righteousness to the great congregation, and I have not refrained my lips, O Lord. And you know, Lord, I have not refrained my lips. Thank you, Jesus. I owe my life to Jesus. Steve, may I have permission to lay hands on a few people? May I have your permission? I can't hear you.
Yes.
Tony, I have been thinking about you. I know the Spirit is here today to do work. I have been thinking about you, Tony, and it's time. It is time. Come up. I'm going to pray. The word says if you have faith,
The grain.
a grain is
Mustard
seed, you can say to the sycamore tree,
Amen.
be plucked up from the root and planted in the sea, and it has to obey.
Amen.
So if there is any cancer that they say is in your body, I am speaking it to it now from its root to come out of this
Amen.
man, never, ever, ever to come back on him again and be cast into the sea, and you must obey.
And it is
in
done.
Jesus' name.
Whatever it is.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.